So there's this very pervasive myth that's floating around the internet, and a lot of smart people have bought into the myth, which is why I think we should address it here. And it's the idea that social democrats, or as we wrongly call them in the US, socialists, want to tax you at 90%. So this has been repeated about Bernie Sanders, and this has been repeated about other leftists, and it's simply incorrect. So let me break it down for you in a few ways here. First, let's go directly to Bernie Sanders and his issues specifically, because he's been tarred with this more than anybody else. So is it true? Well, let's see. In 2008, discussing the issue on Fox Business, he said the following, quote, "No, of course, it is not going to be 90%. Seems pretty simple. He's like, I'm not in favor of a 90% tax rate. More. In 2015 on Yahoo News, in response to Katie Couric saying that he proposed it, quote, "No, I didn't. It's not true. That's one of these things that seems to be circulating." Again, I don't know how he could be more clear. How about on CBS this morning, quote, "No, I don't think you have to go up to 90%. And Trump also claimed that Bernie wants a 90% tax rate. And PolitiFact looked into it, and they said, indeed, this is pants on fire, false, which is their worst possible rating. And in one of the last Democratic debates, Bernie even said the following, quote, "I'm not that much of a socialist compared to Eisenhower." Eisenhower, of course, was a Republican who had a top rate of 91%. Now, I'm going to give you more on that in a second, because it gets complicated when you talk about what indeed was happening with the so-called 91% rate. But just understand that the reality is, it is not true that Bernie wants a 90% tax rate. I'm giving you his words. His words. Requires no interpretation, no mental gymnastics. He says it. Okay, so he's crystal clear. He hasn't given a specific ideal rate yet, but it ain't 90%. Now, let's dig deeper. Does anybody support a 90% tax rate? The answer is actually a resounding no. Because whenever 90% is brought up, it's a marginal rate, which is totally different from a regular rate. So here's what that means. Huffington Post explains, quote, "A 90% top marginal rate doesn't mean that if you make $450,000, you're going to pay $405,000 in federal income taxes." All right, let me pause here. I think people honestly should have been able to understand this without even getting into the details yet. Now, obviously, you should get into the details to really understand what's going on here. But you should think like that. No, that's off. Something's off here. I mean, people are tarring people with wanting to tax them at 90%. So really, if somebody makes $450,000, the government's going to take $405,000. You should be smart enough to say, no, that doesn't sound right. I should learn more about this because there's got to be a better explanation. I don't think anybody really wants that. They say, Americans have a well-documented trouble understanding the notion of marginal tax rates. The marginal tax rate is the amount you pay on your income above a certain amount. Right now, you pay the top marginal tax rate on every dollar you earn over $406,750. Okay, so this is super important, and I need everybody to understand exactly what that means. So as of right now, the top marginal rate is about 39%. I believe it's 39.5% to be exact. But let's just say 40% for argument's sake. So as of right now, the top rate's about 40%. And that doesn't mean that if you make, let's say, $406,000, that the government just takes 40% of it. No. What that means is, because it's a marginal rate, what that means is everything you make over $406,000, that is taxed at 40%. So your first $406,000 is taxed at a lower rate. And this is so important, and so few people understand this, that a marginal rate and a regular rate are not the same thing. So even when the rate was the highest in U.S. history, it was 94%. But again, that's the marginal rate. The government just doesn't come in and take 94% of your money. So they say, quote, the 1944 top rate started at $200,000, which today is equal to $2.4 million. So the maximum rate would apply only to income over $2.5 million. So understand, your first $2.5 million that you make is taxed at a much lower rate, and then everything above $2.5 million is taxed at 94%, but there's another button here. That doesn't even tell the entire story, because then you have to factor in deductions. Quote, when there was a 94% top rate in 1944 to 1945, there were so many deductions and exclusions that the taxable income was not comparable to someone's entire income. In 1944, you could deduct business meals, all business travel, all forms of interest payments, and much more. You could even deduct spousal travel expenses on a business trip. It was possible to shelter tens of thousands of dollars from taxable income. As a result of deductions and exclusions, the richest U.S. taxpayers paid close to 40%. There it is. So, to break it down again so everybody understands it very simply. Whenever anybody talks about a 90% tax rate, they're not talking about the government literally taking 90% of your money. That's crazy. That's not true. You should have been able to realize that just by looking at the situation and going, that doesn't seem right. Who would advocate for that? What political candidate? Yeah, I'm going to take 90% of your money. Nobody would ever. And that's not the case. Nobody's ever been in favor of that, okay? 90% is a marginal rate. Everything you make above $2.5 million, when we had that rate in the U.S., that was taxed at 90% or 94%. But in reality, that wasn't even the real number. After all the deductions and the loopholes, you get down to 40%. So everything over $2.5 million was taxed at 40%. That's not radical at all. And understand, even just the conversation about tax rates, in my opinion, is very misleading just by the nature of the discussion. Now, why do I say that? Because the real conversation should be had in terms of, okay, what do you do for a living? And what's going to be your net income? What are you going to make? So, you know, if I say to you, hey, this guy's a CEO of a toy company, and he's making $5 million a year. $5 million a year. He's a CEO of a toy company. Let's say he works 60 hours a week, which is a lot. But he's making $5 million a year. You probably say, okay, that's a lot, but I get it, it's fair. Now, what if I tell you that, you know, he's taxed at 50%. The government literally took 50% of his money. And, you know, then you go, oh my God, outrageous. But wait, is that outrageous? I just told you the raw number. The raw number is he took home $5 million for being a CEO of a toy company and working 60 hours a week. So when you talk about rates, it can be massively misleading. Like, here's another example. Somebody could come out and say, I'm in favor of a 100% tax rate. And you'd be like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. That makes no sense. That's ridiculous. But what if I told you it's a marginal rate and it's on everything over $1 billion a year? So you have a CEO who's massively wealthy. They make, you know, $1.2 billion. And they're subject to a 100% tax rate. We'd be like, oh my God, that's crazy. No, but it's everything over the $1 billion, so they still get $1 billion. See, that's why it's misleading to even have the conversation in terms of just the rate. But that's what the right wants on this issue. They want it because they can't beat Bernie Sanders on substance. They can't beat him on, hey, who's best for the middle class? Who's best for your average American? So what do? Just make it up, you know? Or you're ignorant and you don't know the facts and you don't know what a 90% marginal rate is and you don't know the difference between a marginal rate and a regular rate. But some people do, and they're purposefully being misleading to try to tar him as some sort of crazy person, when in reality, that's of course not the case. He's very grounded and his policies are overwhelmingly popular when the American people understand what they actually are and you go by the polling data. And then the final thing I want to say is this. I find it so funny that you have people on the right tarring social democrats and, again, people who are wrongly called socialists in the U.S., just tarring the left in general with being, you know, the party of tax hikes, the party of tax hikes. We hear that nonsense line all the time. Now, why do I say it's nonsense? because it's simply a matter of fact. So go through the history of the different tax plans proposed by the Democrats and the Republicans. It's a matter of fact that the Democrats are more the party of tax cuts than the Republicans. You're probably like, wait, huh? That contradicts everything I've ever heard about politics in my life. Well, here's the difference. The Democrats want to cut taxes more for 90% of the American people. The bottom 90% of the American people. The Democrats want to give you more of your own money and, by the way, spend the government money on smarter things like education and healthcare and not war and corporate welfare, okay? Whereas the Republicans, when they talk about cutting taxes, they ain't talking about you, bitch. They're not doing it. You might think that's the case, but that's not true. Go back and look at the plans. My go-to example has always been when it was John McCain versus Barack Obama at the time, Senator Obama at the time. In the 2008 election, CNN Money did an analysis of their tax plans. It turns out the Republicans and John McCain, the people who say, we're the party of tax cuts, they're the party of tax hikes. No, they want you to pay more in taxes for if you're 90%, 9 out of 10 people in the country, they want you to pay more in taxes. They only want to cut it for the rich. The Democrats want to cut it for 90%, and only on the top 10%, and in some cases the top 5%, they want you to pay a little more. So, I'm not a math genius or anything, but if one party wants to cut taxes for 90% of the American people, and the other party only wants to cut taxes for 10% of the American people, and increase it or have it higher on 90%, that would make the Democrats the party of tax cuts. So there's so much misinformation out there, and it's so sad to watch because good people are being duped by it, and people are running with narratives that are wholly made up. The devil's always in the details, man. You got to get down to the nitty-gritty and see what's really happening and what people are really proposing. The reality is, no, nobody wants to literally take 90% of your money. That's crazy, and that should be understood by everybody in this debate.